A Brooklyn landlord says that their tenant hasn't paid rent in 3 years and owes them over $60,000. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today. It's coming once again out of the great city of New York, Brooklyn in particular, and it has to do with a tenant who hasn't paid rent in 3 years. And guess what? The landlord is having a lot of trouble evicting this tenant. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise because I've covered several stories just like this, and unfortunately, it's going to continue to happen because they have extremely strong tenant protections. They've got rent control. Basically, it's a landlord's nightmare up there. They treat you as though you are the criminal because you had the audacity to purchase a property and then rent it out to someone else. They don't think that you deserve to make a profit. They don't think that you have any rights whatsoever. And they say, "Oh, well, you've got to be rich. You're a millionaire because you own this property." Well, you might be a millionaire on paper, but it doesn't mean anything if you are losing money every single month as long as you own that property. That's the thing that a lot of these people don't understand, okay? You only make your money at the sale, but you might not make it to the sale if the property gets foreclosed, okay? So we've got a landlord here who isn't getting paid and is paying the mortgage out of their own pocket. And that's the thing I do not like seeing. And the courts, they're not helping. They're only making things worse. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So do you think that a landlord should be able to evict the tenant in a reasonable amount of time, regardless of the location, okay? There should never, and I mean never, be a location where a tenant is allowed to stay in a property for 3 years without paying rent, okay? That is absolutely ridiculous. I don't know what's going on in New York. We'll have to get into the article to see the specifics of this case. But anyway, let's get into it, okay? This article is coming from AOL.com, and it says, this Brooklyn landlord says his tenant owes $60,000 in unpaid rent. Tried for eviction, but the nightmare has only gotten worse. Here's what happened and how to avoid the same fate. Let's get into it. Kamar Lafayette is a Brooklyn landlord who owns a multi-level home in Bed-Stuy neighborhood. Lafayette has been stuck in the same nightmare since 2021 when an unnamed tenant has been giving him the runaround on paying, essentially squatting, racking up $60,000 in unpaid rent. While Lafayette has tried to get her evicted, he seems to keep running into roadblocks. I'm trying to do the right thing, trying to go the right channel, like within the law, but I'm getting no result, he told News 12 New York. And I wonder, like even in New York, this seems kind of egregious. Now, obviously, back in 2021, they had the whole eviction moratorium thing going on in New York, so I imagine that's where all of this started. And I don't know why it has dragged on so long after that. Now, it might have to do with the fact that if the tenant applied for rental assistance, that stopped the eviction in a lot of cases. Now, I don't know, okay? So the bad thing is that without all of that money, the landlord has to pay the mortgage still, and most likely is paying straight out of his pocket to keep this tenant housed, okay? Now, if I went up to you and let's say you owned a house and I moved into it and just say, I'm living here now. Now, you pay all my bills and you cannot get rid of me. Now, what does that sound like to you? It sounds like stealing. It sounds like theft. Yet, in the eyes of the law, oh, it's a civil matter. It's a civil matter. Yeah, whatever. Okay, this person's a squatter. Period. Okay? The situation has generated a lot of stress for Lafayette and his family, especially his mother, who lives in the ground floor unit of the building. She's doing the most outrageous things, Lafayette says, referring to security camera footage showing the tenant smoking indoors, removing posted signs, leaving the front door wide open, and even lifting floorboards, which Lafayette says led to water damage in his mother's apartment. Now, you would think that if she is doing things that are, creating a safety hazard or destruction of the property, that would be grounds alone for eviction on top of the fact that she's not paying rent. Okay. But Why is this taking so long? I don't know. I don't know the specifics of this case, but there's a reason why. If I am like, my opinion is that if you don't know the eviction process very well, and it might cost you a lot of money, but you should hire an attorney who specializes in evictions. That way you get all of especially in a place like New York, okay? Because New York has so much, notification requirements, so many different little things, little hoops you have to jump through, that it could drag on and end up costing you more. So at the point where the tenant owes you 60 grand, yeah, throwing out a few grand to pay for a lawyer now seems like chump change, doesn't it? Okay, that's why, I know a lot of people, they know the process, like the back of their hand. A lot of landlords can just go down to the eviction court and do everything themselves, right? But if you don't, I certainly would recommend that you hire someone who does, okay? Because it could end up being in a situation like this, where you have lost significantly more than the cost of a lawyer, okay? As the legal process drags on, Lafayette has been forced to cover the mortgage out of pocket, leaving him in financial distress. Although he finally has a court date on the horizon, he's not hopeful. My mortgage is crazy. I can't go to the bank and tell the bank I can't pay the mortgage. This for 3 years, it's rough. And I point out that same fact all the time. Our bills, they keep coming. Okay, regardless of whether the tenant pays or not, right? I have to pay my property taxes. I have to pay my insurance. I have to pay my mortgage. Even if you own the property outright, you still have a lot of expenses. And you're required by law to do repairs to the property. So you have a tenant who is smoking in your property. That smoking does a significant amount of damage to the interior of a property. A lot of people don't realize this, right? But the place will stink. The smoke will seep into the drywall, and it will just, the place will smell bad, and that's property damage in my opinion, okay? So that's part of the reason why a lot of landlords, myself included, say absolutely no smoking inside of my properties, okay? So tearing up the floorboards, all this other stuff this tenant is doing. The fact that the landlord's mom lives on the first floor of the same building, and she has to deal with the nonsense going on. So yeah, she's bothering other tenants up in there as well. And the state law or the city law or whatever law is not allowing them to remove this crap tenant. Okay, it's just frustrating, absolutely frustrating. But I'm not surprised. How many stories have I covered just like this? Dozens of stories. I have over 1,000 videos on this channel, okay? Dozens of stories of New York landlords who are suffering. And I hate hearing it, okay? I hate hearing it. Because, the fake image that you hear is that, oh, these landlords are super rich. A lot of them are just regular people, just like me and you, okay? They own one property, maybe two. They don't make a fortune. They're just getting by, they might be middle class, they might be lower class, whatever. The truth of the matter is, right, they don't deserve to be, they have their rights trampled all over by tenants and by a government that cares more about criminals and thieves than they do about property owners. In New York City, landlord-tenant law is a technical dance where both parties have tools at their disposal to get the outcome they're looking for, or in the tenant's case, delay eviction. One of the most common reasons why evictions can take too long or settle on unfavorable terms is because the landlord didn't follow the lease terms and the technicalities of the law, according to law firm Blotnick, Fazio, and Clark, right? And of course, the law firm is going to say that, but here's what my suggestion is, right? And I don't know how much it would cost you'd have to pay this tenant to leave, but this might be a cheaper option. I've heard of stories like this where you have a tenant up in your property, destroying the place, etc. And you know what? Here's $5,000. Get the heck out of there. I will save money by paying you to leave versus going to eviction court. But what do you think? Okay, would you pay a tenant to leave your property? How much are you willing to pay? I guess it depends on how much you're losing, but I'm just curious. If you're a landlord, put a comment in the comment section down below.